In 2017, the Gulf went to war with itself. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt severed all diplomatic ties with Qatar and closed their airspace to Qatari aircraft. Qatar Airways, one of the most powerful airlines in the world, could no longer fly over the countries surrounding it. Emirates rerouted flights. Etihad calculated losses. The entire Gulf hub model, built on the premise that geography is destiny, cracked under the weight of politics. Every airline in the region faced a crisis, except one.
Aviate has reached 20,000 subscribers passionate about aviation. Our sincere thanks for your support. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications.
The Gulf hub model was built on a single geographic accident. Dubai sits roughly equidistant between Europe and Southeast Asia, between Africa and the Indian subcontinent. In 2024, Dubai International Airport processed 92.3 million passengers, the world's busiest international airport for more than a decade. Emirates became the largest international carrier on the planet, not by serving a massive domestic market, but by turning scale into a product. Qatar Airways and Etihad read the same map and built the same model in Doha and Abu Dhabi. For a decade, the strategy worked for all three: enormous wide-body fleets, global route networks, luxury positioning that European and American carriers struggled to match. But the model had a structural premise built into it, one that looked like a strength and functioned quietly as a vulnerability. Hab carriers needed political stability. They needed open sky agreements that held. They needed airspace corridors to remain uncontested. Etihad went further: equity stakes in Air Berlin, Italia, Jet Airways, Virgin Australia. By 2017, that empire was collapsing. By 2021, the airline had grounded its entire A380 fleet and posted 4 consecutive years in the red. Oman Air, meanwhile, was doing something that looked like a retreat. In 2021, as the pandemic made retreat inevitable, Oman Air announced a reduction from 50 to 36 aircraft. Then, between 2023 and 2024, it went further, cutting the fleet to 32 aircraft, a 40% reduction compared to 2019 levels. From the outside, it looked like failure. CEO Khan Corfiadis, an Australian executive who had previously run the Saudi low-cost carrier Fly a Deal before being brought in to restructure Oman Air, was direct about what was happening. "We were never going to win a game structured that way," he said, referring to the airline's previous heavy reliance on transit passengers. Oman Air stopped competing with Emirates for the passenger flying Heathrow to Singapore and started asking a completely different question: who actually wants to go to Oman, and how do we fill a plane with those people? The transformation was not superficial. The entire fleet of 10 Airbus A330s was retired. First class, which was running at just 8% load factor in 2023, was eliminated in favor of what the airline called the business studio, and front cabin occupancy jumped to 70%. The fleet was reconfigured around the new strategy: Boeing 787-9 for long-haul routes, 737 MAX 8 for the narrow-body network. The distribution model shifted too. The majority of bookings in the domestic market moved to direct channels through the airline's app and website, reducing dependence on global distribution systems and the margins they extract. The results were measurable. In 2024, point-to-point traffic represented 40% of total revenue, up from 27% in 2019. EBITDA improved 40% compared to 2023. Load factor reached 75%. The airline carried 5.4 million passengers with a fleet of 32 aircraft. Oman Air stopped trying to be a small Emirates. That decision probably saved it. What the fleet cuts and strategic pivot unlocked was not just operational efficiency, it was the space to become something none of its neighbors structurally could be. Start with the geography of Omani foreign policy. Oman has maintained uninterrupted diplomatic relations with Iran for decades, during periods when the rest of the Gulf treated Tehran as an existential threat. That was no accident. It was a deliberate, multi-generational choice by Omani leadership, most consistently associated with the late Sultan Qaboos, who governed for nearly 50 decades under a clear doctrine: friend to all, enemy to none. The practical result was extraordinary. When the US and Iran needed a communications channel during the nuclear negotiations, Muscat provided the room. The secret talks that began in 2011 and culminated in the JCPOA in 2015 passed through what became known as the Muscat Channel. When American hostages needed a discreet release mechanism, Oman provided the infrastructure. This is a country that has been professionally neutral for more than 50 years, and that neutrality is not passive. It is the product of an active and deliberate foreign policy. The consequence for aviation is direct. Oman Air holds bilateral agreements and operates routes that Emirates cannot fly without triggering political friction that neither Dubai nor Tehran want to manage. Iran sits between the Gulf and Central Asia, between the Gulf and parts of the Indian subcontinent, a market of 88 million people that remains substantially underserved by international aviation. Then there is the Israeli dimension. In 2018, 2 years before the Abraham Accords normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states, Sultan Qaboos received Prime Minister Netanyahu in Muscat. Quietly, without fanfare, Oman was building working relations with the Israeli government, while the rest of the region was still debating whether it was possible. The Abraham Accords brought UAE and Bahrain into open relations with Israel in 2020. Oman was already there, in its own way, before anyone else made the public move. And then came the Qatar blockade in 2017. Qatari airspace was closed. Qatari Airways was rerouting flights by thousands of kilometers. Oman, which had not taken sides in the conflict, kept its airspace open in every direction. Muscat became, briefly, an indispensable corridor. The conventional reading of the Oman Air story is this: small airline, smart pivot, lean operations. That reading is correct as far as it goes. It just doesn't go far enough.
The Gulf hub model was always more politically dependent than it appeared. Emirates looks like a commercial enterprise. In its function, it is also a diplomatic instrument, a flag carrier for a city-state that bet its future on openness and stability. The moment that political environment shifts, the moment the UAE finds itself on the wrong side of a bilateral agreement or the wrong side of a conflict, the Emirates route network becomes a bargaining chip in a game far larger than aviation. Qatar Airways experienced that directly and catastrophically in 2017. Etihad experienced the softer version through the collapse of its equity partners as the political assumptions embedded in those partnerships dissolved. Oman Air is not insulated from geopolitics. It is insulated from the specific geopolitical risks that affect its neighbors, because Oman has cultivated a different set of relationships over decades across multiple administrations and international crises. Compare the Etihad arc. The airline posted a profit of $476 million in 2024, the largest in its history after years of institutional destruction. It now flies to secondary European cities with smaller aircraft, focused on origin and destination passengers. The logic is identical to Oman Air's: smaller planes, underserved markets, passengers who want to go to Abu Dhabi rather than simply fly over it. Etihad arrived at that conclusion after losing billions. Oman Air got there earlier and with less collateral damage. The difference is that Oman Air never had enough capital to make the mistakes that would take a decade to undo. The competitive threat that actually matters is not a recovered Etihad, it is Riyadh Air. The new Saudi carrier, backed by Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund and led by Tony Douglas, the same executive who ran Etihad during part of its recovery, has ordered 39 Boeing 787-9s with options for 33 more, 60 Airbus A321neos, and 25 Airbus A350-1000s with options for 25 more. It operated its first commercial flight in October of 2025.
Its stated goal is 100 destinations by 2030 and a $20 billion contribution to Saudi non-oil GDP, exactly the same logic as Oman Vision 2040, which targets 12 million annual tourists for a country of 5 million people. If Riyadh Air scales the boutique destination model with unlimited capital behind it, it will compete directly with Oman Air for the premium leisure passenger who wants an authentic Gulf experience. The question is whether Saudi Arabia can replicate Oman's political neutrality. It cannot, not in the short term, and possibly never. Riyadh Air will have capital, it will have aircraft, but it will not have a back channel to Tehran. It will not have the institutional record of 50 years spent staying out of other people's wars. That is the moat, and moats matter most when someone with unlimited capital is advancing in your direction.
Oman's tourism campaign will tell you about Wadi Shab, the Bima sinkhole, and the Mutra Souk. Those places are real and genuinely worth the flight. But the most interesting thing Oman offers is invisible on any tourism poster. It is the attraction of a country that spent half a century making itself useful to everyone, not through power, not through wealth, not through ideological conviction, but through the deliberate and consistent practice of remaining trustworthy to multiple parties simultaneously. Nuclear negotiators trusted Muscat. Netanyahu trusted it enough to land there in 2018. The blockade partners trusted it enough not to punish Oman for refusing to take sides. An airline that operates in that environment does not fly the routes as its neighbors. It flies the routes that only its political heritage makes possible. Every airline in the world operates within a geopolitical context. Most never think about it, because for most of the modern aviation era, that context was stable enough to ignore. What Oman Air represents is the rare case where the airline and the country are in fact the same asset, where foreign policy is the competitive advantage and the aircraft are almost a secondary detail. The Gulf taught the world that geography is destiny. Oman quietly amended that lesson. In aviation, as in diplomacy, the most durable advantage is not where you are, it is who will still talk to you when everyone else has stopped. Do you think Riyadh Air, with all that Saudi capital, can buy what Oman built over 50 years? Tell me in the comments.